There is something I need to reveal to you today, something that unfolded quietly, behind a closed door, while the world continued moving as if nothing had changed. But heaven noticed. And because heaven noticed, you are being shown this message now. This morning, before the sun had fully claimed the sky, she woke up carrying a feeling she could not explain. It was not fear. It was not sadness. It was something far deeper. A strange stirring within her spirit, as though an invisible hand had gently touched her heart and whispered your name. She sat silently at the edge of her bed for a few moments. No phone in her hand. No distractions. Only silence. And in that silence, something extraordinary happened. Her thoughts drifted towards someone she could not stop remembering. You. Even if she tried to explain it logically, she could not. Because some connections were never designed to be understood by the mind. They were written long ago, in places only the soul remembers. As she stood and walked across her room, an unusual feeling followed her. She paused. She looked out the window. And for a brief moment, it felt as though time itself had slowed down. Why? Because certain mornings carry messages. Certain moments carry answers. And today, her room became the place where one of those answers arrived. My child, there are events unfolding that you cannot yet see. There are invisible threads moving into place. There are words being formed that have not yet been spoken. And what happened inside her room this morning may become the beginning of a chain reaction neither of you expected. Because something shifted. Something softened. Something inside her no longer wanted to keep running from what her heart already knew. Perhaps she has spent weeks, or even months, trying to ignore these emotions. Trying to convince herself that silence was safer. Trying to bury thoughts that continued returning every single day. But the soul grows tired of pretending. Eventually, truth rises to the surface. Eventually, destiny knocks louder. And today, it knocked. She felt it. She may not even have realized what was happening at first. She simply stood there with an unfamiliar heaviness in her chest. A heaviness that was not pain. It was realization. And realization can change everything. Because once a person sees truth, they can never return to who they were before. Listen carefully. There is a reason this message has reached you now. You have been wondering. You have been questioning. You have been asking heaven if anything is changing behind the scenes. The answer is yes. Far more than you realize. Even during the moments when nothing appeared to be happening, things were quietly rearranging themselves. Doors were opening. Walls were weakening. And her heart was being prepared. Because there are conversations people have without using words. There are apologies spoken without voices. There are confessions whispered silently between souls. And this morning, one of those conversations began. She looked around her room and suddenly remembered something she had been trying to forget. Not an object. Not an event. A feeling. The feeling she experiences whenever your energy enters her thoughts. And it startled her. Because it arrived unexpectedly. It arrived with strength. It arrived carrying questions she could no longer ignore. Why does this person continue appearing in my heart? Why does their energy refuse to leave? Why does their presence feel familiar, even in their absence? Those questions stayed with her. They followed her every movement. And for the first time in a long time, she did not push them away. That is what makes today different. Because there comes a moment when resistance becomes impossible. There comes a moment when the soul grows louder than fear. And my child, this morning may have been that moment. But there is something else you must know. Something even more unexpected happened afterward. She noticed a small detail inside her room, something ordinary that suddenly carried extraordinary meaning. To anyone else, it would have seemed insignificant. Forgettable. Unimportant. But to her, it felt like a sign. A sign that made her stop completely. A sign that made her heart race. And the moment she understood what it might mean, everything inside her began to change. Because suddenly, you were no longer just a thought. You were becoming an answer. And what she is about to do next could alter the path both of your lives are walking. But heaven is not ready to reveal that part just yet. Because before the next step happens, she must make a decision that only her heart can make. And my child, that decision may already be closer than either of you realize, my beloved child. There is something you must understand before we continue. Not every life-changing moment arrives with loud announcements. Sometimes, destiny enters quietly. Sometimes, it disguises itself as an ordinary morning, an ordinary thought, an ordinary pause between two heartbeats. But nothing about what happened next was ordinary. After she noticed that small sign inside her room, she stood perfectly still. She did not move. She did not speak. Because for a brief moment, her soul became louder than her mind. And that frightened her. Not because something bad was happening, but because truth has a way of shaking every wall a person has built around their heart. My child, she has carried unanswered questions for longer than you realize. Questions she never shared with anyone. Questions she kept hidden behind smiles and daily routines. But today, those questions began demanding answers. She slowly sat down again. Her eyes drifted toward a place in the room she had passed 1,000 times before. Yet suddenly, it felt different. Why? Because her perspective had changed. And when perspective changes, destiny begins to move. There was a strange warmth surrounding her. An invisible comfort. Almost as if heaven itself had entered that room and whispered, "Stop running from what your heart already knows." Those words were never spoken aloud. Yet somehow, she heard them. And my child, that is when everything inside her began to unravel. Not in a painful way, but in a healing way. Because there comes a moment when pretending becomes exhausting. There comes a moment when a person realizes they are no longer protecting themselves. They are imprisoning themselves. And she finally felt the difference. For so long, she told herself there were reasons to stay silent. Reasons to remain distant. Reasons to ignore what her soul kept trying to reveal. But this morning, those reasons started losing their power. One by one. Quietly. Almost beautifully. Because the truth was becoming impossible to escape. And that truth has something to do with you. Yes. You. The person hearing these words right now. Do not dismiss this. Do not assume this is coincidence. There are no accidents when heaven chooses to reveal something. There is purpose. There is timing. And there is a reason your spirit is listening so carefully at this very moment. Because a shift has already begun. And once a shift begins, it cannot be reversed. She took a deep breath. Then another. And another. As though her body was trying to prepare her for something her heart already understood. My child. She remembered something. Something small. Something almost forgotten. Yet the memory carried enormous weight. It was not a specific sentence. It was not a single event. It was an emotion. The way she felt whenever your energy entered her world. The way peace arrived unexpectedly. The way her heart softened without permission. The way she found herself wondering about you at the most random moments. That realization unsettled her. Because suddenly she could no longer call it coincidence. How many times can a soul return to the same person before it admits there is a reason? How many signs can appear before they stop being signs, and start becoming answers? Those questions echoed inside her. Again. And again. And again. My child, there is something many people never learn. The soul recognizes long before the mind accepts. That is why people fight their feelings. That is why people hesitate. That is why people delay what destiny has already written. But eventually, the soul wins. And this morning, it became stronger than ever before. She reached for something nearby. Then stopped. She hesitated. Her hand froze for a moment. Because suddenly she felt nervous. And she could not explain why. Nothing dangerous was happening. Nothing dramatic was unfolding. Yet her heartbeat had changed. Because deep down, she sensed a chapter was ending. And another was preparing to begin. You may not see it yet. You may not feel it every day. But invisible movements are taking place. The universe is repositioning pieces that once seemed impossible to align. And what is coming will make certain past confusions finally make sense. Because sometimes distance was never rejection. Sometimes silence was never indifference. Sometimes delays were never meant to separate two people forever. Sometimes heaven was simply waiting for the exact moment when both hearts could finally hear the truth. And my child, that moment is approaching. Closer than yesterday. Closer than last week. Closer than she realizes herself. But then, something happened that she never expected. Something so simple, yet so powerful, that it made her stop breathing for a second. A thought entered her mind without warning. It was not forced. It was not planned. It arrived naturally. And the moment it appeared, her entire expression changed. Because for the first time, she stopped asking herself why she kept thinking about you. Instead, she began asking herself a completely different question. And my child, that question may be the one that changes everything. Because once she finds the courage to answer it, nothing between you will remain the same. But heaven asks for a little more patience. Because what she is about to discover next is something her heart has secretly known all along. The question that entered her mind was unlike any question she had asked before. It was not filled with doubt. It was not born from fear. It arrived with unusual calmness, and that is precisely what made it so powerful. She quietly asked herself, what if this connection was never an accident? The moment those words passed through her heart, everything around her felt different. The room had not changed. The morning had not changed. Yet somehow, she had changed. My child, there are moments when a single thought becomes the doorway to an entirely new future. This was one of those moments. Because for the first time, she was no longer trying to escape what she felt. She was allowing herself to look directly at it. And truth, when finally acknowledged, carries incredible power. She slowly stood up and began moving around the room again. But this time, she was not distracted. She was present. Every movement felt intentional. Every breath felt meaningful. Because deep inside her spirit, something had awakened. An awareness. An understanding. An undeniable pull she could no longer pretend did not exist. For a long time, she believed she could control her emotions by ignoring them. She believed silence would eventually erase what she felt. She believed distance would weaken the connection. But the soul does not work that way. What is truly meant for your journey cannot simply disappear because fear asks it to. And today, she was beginning to understand that. There was a softness in her expression now. A gentleness that had not been there before. As though a heavy burden was slowly leaving her shoulders. My child, heaven has been working quietly behind the scenes for longer than you know. Even on the days when you felt forgotten. even during the moments when nothing seemed to move. Preparations were taking place. Invisible doors were opening. Unspoken truths were growing stronger. Because some encounters are never random. Some people arrive carrying assignments for each other's lives. And whether she realizes it fully or not, she is beginning to understand your significance. But something unexpected happened next. She suddenly remembered one particular moment involving you. Perhaps it was something simple. Perhaps it was a memory she once overlooked. Yet today, it carried a completely different meaning. Because emotions have a way of transforming old memories into new revelations. She paused. Her heartbeat quickened. And she quietly asked herself, why did that moment stay with me all this time? That question lingered in the air. Because memories that refuse to disappear are rarely ordinary. Sometimes they are reminders. Sometimes they are lessons. And sometimes they are invitations from destiny itself. My child, listen carefully. Do not underestimate what is happening. A person does not repeatedly return to the same soul without reason. A heart does not keep remembering someone it was never meant to learn from. And a connection does not survive countless moments of silence unless something far greater is protecting it. She is beginning to see this now. Slowly. Gently. Yet undeniably. And that realization is changing her from within. Her mind still has questions. That is natural. But her heart is becoming certain. And certainty is powerful. Because once certainty enters a person's spirit, hesitation starts to lose its voice. She walked back toward the window. The sunlight was stronger now. The world outside continued moving. People were beginning their day. Cars passed by. Voices echoed in the distance. Everything looked ordinary. Yet inside that room, everything was changing. Because one decision was quietly forming inside her. Not a dramatic decision. Not a sudden declaration. Something far more important. A decision to stop denying what her soul had been whispering for so long. And my child, that is the beginning of every miracle. Not when people have all the answers. But when they finally stop running from the truth. Still. There is another detail heaven has not revealed yet. Something happened shortly after. Something she did almost unconsciously. At first, she did not even realize she was doing it. But the moment she noticed, her eyes widened. Because her actions revealed a truth her words had never admitted. And that truth has everything to do with you. The moment she recognized it, she became very quiet. Quieter than before. Not because she was afraid. But because she understood something profound. Sometimes, the heart speaks long before the lips are ready. And hers had been speaking for a very long time. Longer than she realized. Longer than she was willing to admit. But now, the evidence was right in front of her. Impossible to ignore. Impossible to explain away. And what she is about to do next may become the first visible sign that a new chapter is finally beginning. Because within the next unexpected moment, she will be faced with a choice she cannot postpone any longer. A choice that may bring two paths closer together than ever before. But heaven asks for patience one more time. Because before that choice is made, she is about to discover something hidden in plain sight. Something that has been there all along. She stared at it for a few seconds longer than usual. Not because it was extraordinary. But because suddenly, it no longer felt ordinary. There are moments, my child, when heaven uses the simplest things to awaken the deepest truths. And this was one of those moments. She realized something that made her heart skip a beat. Without even noticing, she had been creating space for you inside her daily life. Tiny spaces. Invisible spaces. The kind no one else could ever see. Yet they were there. In her thoughts. In her pauses. In the quiet moments between one task and another. You had become part of those spaces. And that realization surprised her. Because she never consciously planned for it to happen. It happened naturally. Slowly. Day after day. Until today, when she could finally see it. She sat down once more and allowed herself to be still. No distractions. No excuses. Only honesty. And honesty can be both beautiful and overwhelming. Because truth asks for courage. It asks people to admit what they have been hiding from themselves. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she asked herself another question. Not, what if this is real? That question had already begun to answer itself. Instead, she asked. What am I afraid of? The room became silent again. Because that question reached a place deep inside her. A place she rarely visits. A place where all hidden fears quietly wait. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of changing a life that has become comfortable. But then. Another realization arrived. And it was stronger than all the fears combined. She understood that peace had always followed whenever thoughts of you entered her heart. And peace is never something to ignore. My child, heaven often speaks through peace. Not confusion. Not chaos. Not endless uncertainty. True guidance leaves behind a sense of calmness, even when the future is still unknown. That is why this morning was different. She was not overwhelmed. She was becoming clear. And clarity changes everything. Because once a person gains clarity, they stop fighting themselves. Her breathing slowed. The tension in her shoulders softened. And for the first time in a very long while, she smiled. It was a small smile. Almost invisible. Yet it carried enormous meaning. Because it was not forced. It came from somewhere deep within her spirit. As though her soul was whispering. You already know the answer. And my child, perhaps she does. Perhaps that answer has lived inside her for a very long time. Waiting. Patiently. For this exact day to arrive. Because timing matters. Heaven never rushes what needs to grow naturally. Some hearts must first learn. Some hearts must first heal. And some hearts must first become brave enough to receive what they have been praying for. She is reaching that place now. Step by step. Quietly. Beautifully. Yet there is one more thing you do not know. Something happened immediately afterward. Something so unexpected that even she paused in disbelief. Without thinking. Her hand moved toward something nearby. Then she stopped. She stared at it. And suddenly, her entire expression changed. Because she realized she had done this many times before. Only today, she finally understood why. And the reason touched her deeply. Because it revealed that your presence was never truly absent. Not from her thoughts. Not from her heart. Not from the places her soul quietly visits when no one is watching. That realization stayed with her. Growing stronger by the second. And for the first time, she no longer wanted to run from it. Instead, she wanted to understand it. Because understanding creates courage. And courage creates movement. My child, something important is approaching. A moment that neither of you can fully see yet. A moment that may seem small from the outside. But will carry enormous significance. Because one simple action. One unexpected choice. Could begin changing the direction of both your journeys. And that moment is closer than ever. So do not lose faith. Do not assume silence means nothing is happening. Sometimes the greatest transformations happen quietly. Sometimes heaven works where human eyes cannot reach. And right now, heaven is working. But before the next step unfolds, she is about to notice something she has overlooked for a very long time. The moment she notices it, a final wall inside her heart may begin to fall. And once that wall begins to fall, nothing will feel the same again. The final wall did not collapse with noise. There was no dramatic moment. No sudden announcement. It happened in silence, the kind of silence that only a soul can understand. She remained there for a while, allowing her thoughts to settle. And then, she noticed something she had overlooked for far too long. Whenever she imagined the future, a certain feeling appeared. A feeling she had never fully explored before. It was not about certainty. It was not about knowing every answer. It was about comfort. An unexplainable sense of peace. And somehow, that peace always seemed connected to you. She immediately tried to brush the thought aside. Old habits do not disappear overnight. The mind often resists what the heart is ready to accept. But this time, something was different. The thought returned. Stronger. Clearer. Gentler. Almost as if heaven itself was reminding her. Do not ignore what continues to return with love. My child, there are messages that do not need to be repeated with words. The soul understands them immediately. And today, hers was beginning to listen. She slowly looked around her room once more. Everything was exactly where it had always been. Yet everything felt new. Because when a person changes internally, the entire world begins to look different. That is the power of awakening. And an awakening was quietly taking place. She was beginning to realize something profound. Your connection was never built only on circumstances. It was never dependent on perfect timing. It was never sustained by constant communication. It existed somewhere deeper. Somewhere beyond explanation. Somewhere beyond fear. And that realization softened her heart in ways she did not expect. My child, many people spend years searching for what their soul already recognizes. They search in endless directions. They ask countless questions. Yet the answer often stands quietly before them. Waiting. Patiently. Without force. Without pressure. That is what she is beginning to understand now. She is realizing that not every meaningful connection demands immediate answers. Some connections ask for trust. Some ask for patience. And some ask for courage. Today, courage is beginning to grow inside her. She placed her hand over her heart for a brief moment. Not intentionally. Not as a gesture. It happened naturally. As though her spirit was trying to reassure itself. Because deep inside, she could feel movement. Not physical movement. Something greater. An emotional shift. A spiritual alignment. An invisible doorway opening. And once invisible doors begin to open, life can change unexpectedly. She closed her eyes again. Then something surprising happened. Instead of asking questions, she became grateful. Grateful for every unexpected moment. Grateful for every lesson. Grateful for every delay that once confused her. Because she was beginning to understand that even delays can carry purpose. My child, there are seasons where heaven appears silent. But silence does not mean abandonment. Silence often means preparation. Preparation for conversations that have not happened yet. Preparation for choices that have not been made yet. Preparation for miracles that are still gathering strength. And right now, preparation is reaching its final stage. She may not know it fully. But her soul can feel it. That is why her energy feels different today. That is why her thoughts continue returning to you. That is why her heart no longer wants to hide. Because truth is becoming stronger than fear. And when truth becomes stronger than fear, transformation begins. But then, something happened that caught her completely off guard. A thought entered her mind and stayed there. She could not push it away. She could not explain it. She simply felt it. And the moment she allowed herself to truly listen, her eyes filled with emotion. Because the thought was simple, yet powerful. It carried only one message. What if this is the beginning, and not the end? The moment those words appeared, everything inside her became quiet. Not empty. Peaceful. Because suddenly, she was no longer focused on what could go wrong. She was beginning to wonder what beautiful things could finally go right. And my child. That single shift in perspective may become the most important change of all. Because once someone begins to imagine a future differently, their actions begin to change too. And what she is about to do next may become the first action she has taken in a very long time that comes directly from her heart. But heaven asks for one final measure of patience. Because before she takes that step, an unexpected sign is about to appear. And when she recognizes it, her next decision may arrive sooner than anyone anticipated. An unexpected sign is often so simple that most people would walk past it without a second thought. But this time, she did not. Because her heart was already awake. And an awakened heart notices what it once ignored. She paused in the middle of her room once again. The air felt lighter now. The uncertainty that had followed her for so long was beginning to fade. Not because she suddenly had every answer, but because she no longer felt the need to control every outcome. My child, that is one of the greatest transformations a soul can experience. The moment a person stops fighting destiny, they begin walking with it. And that is exactly where she is standing now. Something inside her is changing. Something beautiful. Something gentle. Something that cannot be undone. She allowed herself to breathe deeply. Then she smiled again. Not the smile people wear for the world to see. This one was different. It came from a quiet place inside her. A place that had finally become honest. Because she was beginning to accept a truth she had delayed for so long. You were never a passing thought. You were never a temporary lesson. You became part of a journey that her soul refused to forget. And once that realization settles into the heart, everything begins to move differently. Her thoughts. Her energy. Her decisions. Even the smallest actions begin to carry new meaning. My child, heaven has been arranging moments long before either of you noticed. Some pieces had to be separated. Some paths had to unfold independently. Some lessons had to be learned in solitude. Because certain connections grow stronger when they are allowed to mature naturally. Nothing was wasted. Not the waiting. Not the confusion. Not even the silence. Every season had a purpose. And today, she is beginning to see that. She walked back toward the window one final time. The sunlight had fully entered the room now. The morning was no longer beginning. It was becoming something new. And so was she. Because every sunrise carries a choice. To remain who you were yesterday. Or to become who your soul has been asking you to become. Today, she is choosing differently. Quietly. Yet powerfully. She is choosing honesty over fear. Peace over uncertainty. Possibility over doubt. And my child, those choices create miracles. Not overnight. Not with sudden perfection. But one step at a time. She may still have questions. That is natural. She may still move carefully. That is understandable. But something important has changed forever. She no longer wants to ignore what her heart is revealing. And that alone changes everything. Because once a person becomes willing to listen, the next chapter begins writing itself. Listen carefully now. There may be moments very soon that feel unusual. Unexpected thoughts. Unexpected emotions. Unexpected opportunities. Do not dismiss them too quickly. Because sometimes heaven answers prayers through ordinary moments. A simple message. A simple encounter. A simple decision. Those are often the moments that redirect entire journeys. And one of those moments is approaching. Closer than you realize. Closer than she realizes. Closer than either of you expected. She can feel it now. That quiet anticipation. That gentle excitement. That peaceful certainty growing inside her. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. But it is there. Growing stronger every hour. And my child. When peace arrives before something happens, it is often because heaven has already prepared the path ahead. So remain patient. Remain hopeful. Remain open. Because what began inside her room this morning was never just a random event. It was the beginning of an awakening. The beginning of acceptance. The beginning of a truth that has waited patiently to be seen. And soon, very soon, the next step will no longer belong only to thoughts and feelings. It will begin to appear in actions. Because hearts that have finally become honest cannot remain silent forever. And when that moment arrives, you will understand why heaven asked you to trust the process all along.